You are now watching Zaclasage PTCG. Let's get it! Yo, what's poppin'? Zaclasage here. Today we're going to be going over the top 10 best decks in Standard throughout the month of February. So these are the decks that have performed well in January, decks that I think are very of the moment. I'm creating this video on a Thursday, and the video is getting released on a Friday. So it's basically going to be all the decks up until the Thursday now. So a lot of it's going to be very cutting edge of the meta. Some of the decks have shifted in and out of the meta from last month. Some of them have gone way up, some of them have gone way down, and that's just as my opinion changes as the game grows. So as my friend Maddie from Chill TCG might do it, he might do it based off of the mathematics of Pokestats and stuff like that, which I think is a great system. For me, mine's really more of my personal feeling, kind of as a competitive player in the online sphere. So if you like that opinion, be sure to check out this video. The lists are included in this video, so feel free to screenshot any of the lists. I am going to try to include most of them below. There is a character limit, and if you're missing any of the cards for this deck, go to ptcgostore.com, plug in code Zaclasage5 to save 5% on your next order of codes. Alright, let's get it. Let's jump into these decks. So coming in our number 10 spot for this month, we got Decidueye Obstagoon. Now, Decidueye Obstagoon is one of those decks that often falls in and out of the metagame, and it kind of started when Obstagoon was first released in Sword and Shield. The deck was like low-key, no one really played it, I was testing it, another few top players were testing it, but it was able to make top 4 at the Oceania International Championships. Once Decidueye was released in Darkness Ablaze, Decidueye kind of popped up here and there. I remember it was like, I was telling people it's one of the decks that I would just bring to a regional tomorrow. Deep Forest, Camo is just a really good ability in general, just stopping VMAX GX Pokemon. Sometimes you can just hit a deck and automatically win, and sometimes your skill can bring you to a few other top placements. Well, now that we've seen the deck kind of settle in the meta, it's kind of settled to a lower position because a lot of decks do pack answers. If you look at the top of the metagame, Centiskorch does have Volcanion, and it does have Centiskorch VMAX to take care of this. Eternatus VMAX has Eternatus VMAX, Spiritomb, Hoopa, Yveltal, things that can get around this deck. So when you have a lot of the top decks competing that also just allow you to beat a match like this, it's one of the reasons why this deck gets pushed off to the bottom. Would it be surprising to see a deck like this win an event? No, not at all. I think it could be very good, but there's just sometimes issues with decks like this, especially when it comes to more of a metagame call. So as new cards get released or as the metagame changes, always keep an eye on this deck because it is a deck that can come back. For those of you who don't know about the strategy of this deck, the strategy of this deck works with Decidueye to stop your opponent's V Pokemon GX and VMAX Pokemon from doing damage to it, and at that point you just use Splitting Arrow and try to isolate your opponent's Pokemon. The cool thing in here is the Rowlet, so you can use Sky Circus and Birdkeeper to start attacking things with Wind Shard for free while you build up Decidueye with energy on the bench. Just another option, or you can use the sniping prowess between Splitting Arrow, Wind Shard, Galarian Zigzagoon, Scoop Up Net, and Galarian Obstagoon's ability, along with Mew. I mean, there's a lot of spreading cards in here to kind of stop some strategies that your opponent's doing. Of course, you got some setup cards like Snorlax, and you got Jirachi that allow you to draw some cards. I mean, it's a really interesting supporter engine, and this is really one of the most like diverse decks. Like if you look at all the different cards, a lot of the decks nowadays are like 2 lines of Pokemon, not a lot of unique cards, but this deck does have quite a few unique cards. And I mean, I think this list is generally fairly strong. Beyond Rosa, most of the cards in this deck are quite easy to acquire. I'd say it's even a budget deck. So if you're balling on a budget, this one's a pretty good deck to choose. It can compete with the decks. I know that my pal Daniel Altavilla, Dax PTCG, has been crushing the Players' Cup with a very similar list to this. So if you're struggling a little bit, this might be the deck for you. However, I do think that as much as it does have some good matchups like Pikaram, it can fail to the very popular Centiskorch, Eternatus VMAX, and there's a handful of decks that you could just lose to, especially if you hit against some evolution-based decks and stuff like that. So do keep that in mind if you do decide to play Decidueye. But I mean, it is a hot deck. I do like it, and I do think it's very viable. So well deserving of its number 10 spot this month. Following up Decigoons, we got Mad Party. So Mad Party is one of those decks where, I mean, a lot of people think it's fun. It kind of falls on the heels of the Lost March, Night March mechanics that we've had from the yesteryears, but There is Twin Energy and there is Triple Acceleration Energy, so that you can attack with your Bunnelby and your Poltegeist. Unfortunately, Dedenne and Mr. Rhyme do not have a great array of options to attack with their Mad Party attacks. The way that this deck works, you want to get a bunch of Mad Party Pokemon in your discard pile. You do extra damage for each Mad Party Pokemon that's in there. And then you can attach a single energy of Twin Energy or Triple Acceleration to a Poltegeist or Bunnelby to try to overcome your opponent. This deck typically does well against most 3 prize card decks and some 2 prize card attacking decks. However, it does fail to single prize card attacking decks most often. It can fail to decks like Spiritomb and Yveltal in a Eternatus deck. It can fail to a Volcanion sometimes. The deck can be a little bit flimsy considering its draw engine is based off using a bunch of Dedenne-GX and Crobat V, and then hopefully using Giovanni's Exile. If you are playing against a deck like this, you can add damage counters to those Pokemon, because Giovanni's Exile does not take away Pokemon that have damage counters on them already. Sometimes you're going to get a handful of energies, so that's why this deck's a little bit lower placed. It's still like missing a few key components. Maybe if there was another Mad Party Pokemon release, this deck would be bonkers amazing. But, I mean, it's a super fun deck, one of the most interesting decks to play when you're playing in a tournament. So if you're looking for something new, this would definitely be a great choice. With the Dedenne-GX going down and the Crobat V promo coming out, this is definitely one of the more budget decks in the format, and maybe you could even find a system that works a little bit better. There's a Duskull that discards Mad Party Pokemon. If you are balling on a little bit of a tighter budget, you don't have enough for those Dedenne-GX or the Crobat Online, I mean, there is the PTC Geostore discount. It does save you 5%. You can play in some online tournaments, win some free packs as well. So, I mean, I think this is one of the more budget decks, but it is making the top 10 list. There's not that many decks in format right now. We do have 10 very powerful decks. Mad Party can win tournaments. Again, you just got to watch out for inconsistency issues, energy balance issues, and then single prize card Pokemon. If you're able to overcome those, or you're just willing to face fear in its face, go ahead and play Mad Party. I think it's an absolute fun time. Poison Etern, a deck that I once viewed as the best Etern variant, I think it was even last month, has fallen down to our number 8 spot. Why did this happen? Well, I feel like my testing group of Gabriel Smart and Andrew Pokahakai, I feel like we just reinvented Eternatus VMAX, the normal version, to a level where it's more successful. So my girlfriend Michelle Babin was able to win the Chill Series event with it, with over 200 players, with a normal version of Eternatus, and this deck has been falling down rapidly ever since. It just can't keep up to Crushing Hammers. There are inconsistency issues behind having Toxicroak and Eternatus VMAX. Now, is there anything wrong with this variant? No, this is a very strong variant, and if you like playing this variant, you just gotta watch out for other E-turns, because I've also popularized the Dangerous Drill card in the game, along with the other few select players, so the fact that the deck plays 4 special energies means that Crushing Hammers and Dangerous Drill can often just eat your setup alive, and that's one thing to really worry about. I do like inclusions in this deck where you can just go Eternatus VMAX, evolve, build up some Pokemon, hit the Slowbro Poison, and hit for a lot of damage. Toxicroak increasing the damage of Slowbro V, Eternatus VMAX allowing you to play more Pokemon. The deck is synergy. It screams synergy here. Everything works incredibly well together. So if you're new to the game and budget's not really of an issue to you, I think that this is a really good deck to kind of show you what an average Pokemon deck looks like, or what a really good Pokemon deck construction looks like. All the cards are really meant for each other, like Dark City, attaching the dark energies. There's some cool strategies that you could pull off with Switch, Slowbro, hiding dark energy. Like, there's cool stuff that you could pull off with this deck, and I mean, I think it's a really good place to learn about more of the dynamics of the game, adding up damage with poison, trying to get knockouts in between turns with those sneaky plays. I mean, Eternatus VMAX is still winning events, so maybe it's slightly too... It might be too lowly positioned on my list. My personal thought is that it's hard to come up with 10 decks to put on the best decks list, and the fact that this one's number 8 just shows that there's other better decks that are performing better, or decks that I think can do better at events right now. So I mean, if you're not in the top 5, it probably doesn't matter too much on placement, but I am putting the Eternatus at number 8 because I do view the other decks higher than it. But if you are an Eternatus Poison fan, there's nothing wrong with this deck. It probably will just bounce back next month. Maybe it won't, but we'll have to see. If I could include another deck on this list, if you're like, Zach, you're going to include Etern twice, because Etern's up there. Not to, no spoilers, Etern's up there. I mean, I probably put like Rillaboom Rowegg in the top 10. That's probably fine. Or like a Mewtwo Rowegg deck, something like that would probably make top 10. Beyond that, though, I think Eternatus Poison is enough different than the other Eternatus variant that it just probably deserves to have its own spot. Okay. I admit I might have a personal bias towards this deck. This is another one of those decks that Gabriel Smart, Michelle Babin, and I have kind of created into our own and kind of revitalized the Coalossal VMAX kind of spread in this game. Like, I mean, Coalossal VMAX was a dead deck. I had the thought process of bringing it back, and actually this deck allowed me to win my team challenge so I can play for Torchlight Games in Burlington, Ontario. I think this is the exact list that I played for that event too, so it is a tournament winning deck. I do have a lot of personal knowledge, and I mean, I do have a video on the channel on how to play this deck as well, so hopefully y'all can check that out. I mean, for a lot of these decks, I will be putting the YouTube cards in the top right, so check out for that if you were learning a little bit more about the deck. But most of the decks on this channel have been featured, so hopefully that allows you to kind of understand where I'm coming from with a lot of these choices. Coalossal VMAX doing a lot of damage, very good against Etern, Poison Etern, Pikaram. If ADP was a little bit more popular, I'd probably have a Wondrous Lab in this deck. Crushing Hammers is very good right now. There's a lot of good things going on for this deck. It does suffer from a Lucmetal matchup, a very poor Lucmetal matchup, that is. It does suffer from a very poor Centiskorch matchup. Maybe not very poor. It's closer than most people think. But if you're playing against the Thomas Brophies, the Cashmans, the Alex Shemanskys of the world, I mean, you're definitely going to have a little bit of a struggle. How this deck works is you want to use Oranguru and Rotom Phone to stack cards to the top of your deck. So you could use Eruption Shot for more damage and accelerate energies so that you could be attacking with Coalossal VMAX's G-Max attack to do 240, 240, 240. In the process, if you're playing against a Pikaram deck, you might be like, yo, I'm going to turn my deck into a Psychic type deck. And I mean, that's going to work. That's where the Mimikyu stops the deck completely, because you just need to hit the Mewtwo for any amount of damage. And then they cannot use Mewtwo for the rest of the game as long as you have the Mimikyu in play. Galarian Zigzagoon V allows you to pivot in and out, hit for those large numbers, especially against like Eternatus VMAX, where you can't necessarily always one-shot them because this deck does not play Martial Arts Dojo. But really just like stacking your deck between Oranguru and Rotom Phone and legally stacking your deck every single turn is quite fun. This is one of the more enjoyable decks to play in the format. A lot of really cute inclusions of the Malolana, the Crushing Hammers, the double Great Catchers, and double Boss's Orders, because all the setup Pokemon that are popular right now, such as Crobat V and Dedenne-GX, are all weak to fighting types. So I mean, there's definitely a lot of fight in this deck, and I mean, it's something that I think could get higher positioned. Again, Lucmetal being such a force in this format, and ADP being a bit of a washy matchup, and Centiskorch being a bit of a washy matchup are difficult. But in Eternatus, in an Eternatus and Pikaram orientated metagame, this is clearly one of the best decks, and it's kind of like fighting type Lucmetal if you think about it. Lucmetal counters Eternatus, tries to counter a few other decks. I think that this deck is just another one of those decks. You just have to find the right kind of position for it. So if you're trying to beat some of the top players or top decks right now, this is definitely one of the best ways to go about it, and it's super fun. I've kind of worked this list from the ground up, and a lot of the inclusions are great. You can check out my Twitter. I've also included a lot of Coalossal lists on there, so be sure to. So this is one where I'm not sure if this is the exact list that I want to include. So this is kind of the catch-all for all these fire toolbox type decks, where you got the Blacephalon, Crycephalon, some incorrectly call it Temposard, or maybe correctly call it Temposard. It's a debate right now. I mean, I think Andrew would definitely call it Crycephalon, because he is the one who created the concept of this deck, But don't get me wrong, fire toolbox concepts have been existing for a while, so if you're a purist Blacephalon player, I think it's cool, but the fact is you just cut a Blacephalon for a Reshiram, and you cut a Blacephalon for a Cramorant, and then you have this deck. So when it comes to, like, is it a budget deck, is it a Blacephalon deck, I mean, if you're missing some of these cards, feel free to diversify. There's Heatran-GX, Talonflame V. I mean, I've discussed this in my YouTube video for the deck. This deck has a varying strategy, but the end goal here is to Welder onto a wide assortment of attackers, whether it's Cramorant, Blacephalon, or Reshiram and Charizard-GX, depending on the situation that you're in, to try and draw some prize cards or set up knockouts. If you're playing against a VMAX Pokemon, using Cramorant V to first off snipe something, and then following up with a Reshiram Charizard-GX, using a Double Blaze GX is quite often this strong strategy. You could also use Fireball Circus with a lot of fire energies. There are 4 fire crystals in order to make this deck work. This version of the deck has been doing a lot better than the straight Blacephalon list, and I think it's just due to it can adapt to playstyles a little bit better. You can adapt to what your opponent's doing a little bit better, and you do have some of those strong physical punching attacks. So what I mean by that is Fireball Circus requires you to discard fire energy from your hand. That might not always be an option when you have all these different tech cards. So instead of you discarding 4 fire energies from your hand, at least Reshiram and Charizard-GX can just do it without discarding it, and it just has the hard printed 200 or the hard printed 230. Same as Cramorant V has the hard printed 160 anywhere. That could just finish off a Dedenne-GX for a game, whereas Blacephalon has to fight a little bit more after you use Fireball Circus. That's why it has a no damage cap on the output, but I mean, it's pretty cool. A lot of the cards here to make sure the deck gets set up between Jirachi, Dedenne, Crobat, Mewtwo, or Corio. Other things in case you need to do some more damage with Zigzagoon, or your opponent plays a Chaotic Spell on the Marshadow. And I mean, there's some cards here to just like grab state supporters like Pokegear. Boss Orders is pretty common in every single deck. So I mean, this deck seems pretty self-explanatory when you start playing it. However, just kind of try to come up with a game plan. Think about the prize cards that you're trying to draw when you're playing against your opponent. The best route to victory. I mean, I always like to compare victory to driving a car. You know how to basically drive to work or school or a loved one's house or something like that, and you just go the most direct way. There's no point of you driving around the whole city to go the other way, even if it might add a few miles. It doesn't make sense. So think of the game same way as Pokemon. Like, what is the most direct path for you to win, and how can you stay online for that? Is that achievable? So just making goals around that is a good way to play this deck. So if you're very logical minded and you can come up with things on the fly and stuff like that, I think this is a great deck to be playing, right? Alright, for all those who want to see ADP bans, you might be like, yo Zach, why is this number 5 on your list? And that's because it is number 5 on my list. ADP is not the best deck, the second best deck, the third best deck. At one point, I very much considered this to be the best deck. The issue is, it got countered to the metagame with Crushing Hammers. It got countered to the metagame with Eternatus VMAX doing a lot of damage. Centiskorch doing a lot of damage. Pikaram using Tandem Shock, Marnie, Crushing Hammer, Reset Stamp, and then Tagbolt GX to win games. I mean, if you've been following up with my Players Cup 2 Global Finals recap, you might have noted that I've played against ADP, and I've won against them all but one time, and that one time I got incredibly unlucky and even brought it to a Game 3. Then I rematched my opponent and was able to win in the same event in the loser's bracket. ADP is just not well positioned in this metagame. Now, I'd be crazy to say that this deck is not broken. I think that for anyone joining the game, if you've picked up a couple of the ADP or Zacian V League Battle decks, this is a really great way for you to upgrade your list. These are a lot of really nice changes to the deck and additions to the deck. Is this a deck that I would bring to a tournament? I don't think so. It just doesn't feel well positioned to get the top decks. Similar to how Coalossal doesn't feel well positioned against some of the other decks, I'd say Coalossal might even be better positioned. However, Coalossal is just not a better deck at its core. Now, that's my opinion. Sue me about it, I don't know. ADP, for those of you who don't know, it has the attack Altered Creation GX with a fighting and a water energy on it. You're doing an additional 30 damage for the rest of the game, and you're drawing an extra prize card every time you knock something out. You could then use Ultimate Ray, chase down your opponent's setup Pokemon like Dedenne-GX, Crobat V, Boss's Orders, Great Catcher that up, and then use Ultimate Ray to power up Zacian V. Zacian V is a really good way for you to make your deck a little bit more consistent, has incredible synergy with Metal Saucer, and can do a lot of damage for a low amount of energies on a basic Pokemon. So you kind of have these very like wombo combo type things where it's like, I'm going to get a couple energies on an ADP. Now I'm going to attack with Zacian. Even if they knock your ADP out before you get off Ultimate Ray, Metal Saucer on a Mawile-GX is quite often a valid choice after ADP does more damage. You can see that there's actually 2 copies of Mawile-GX. That's for you to have a better chance against the Decigoons, Altaria type matchups, things where your opponent's really just holding onto a lot of cards. It's also very... of the moment, Eternatus is absolutely dominating. Many have considered Eternatus the best deck, or if not, the second best deck in format right now. I think that Wily Bite, just doing a lot of damage to those Pokemon, allowing you to power it up for 2 energies instead of Zacian V's 3 energies, makes Mawile a much more efficient attacker in that matchup. And once they do knock out your ADP, which they quite often will, you could power up with Metal Saucer and win the game. The deck is really based around drawing extra cards, doing extra damage in the case of Leon, removing your opponent's damage reducers, like Tool Scrapper, there's the Big Charms, the Metal Goggles, the Cape of Toughness that your opponent could play, and then really Boss, Great Catcher, Eldegoss are really huge to kind of make things happen. You can often get a turn 1 Altered Creation GX with Energy Switch, Metal Saucers. Even if your opponent plays Crushing Hammers, you can get one that you got off a Metal Saucer, Intrepid Sword, and then use your Altered Creation GX the next turn. So I think this is a very good current list. Maybe you want to see a Big Charm in here. Maybe you don't. I don't know. It's one of those things where you got to really experiment with the deck like this. It's not perfect. It's never going to be perfect. But as it tries to adapt to the metagame, I wouldn't count ADP out. Again, if you're new, you could quite often just get a good hand against, or an average hand against a good player who's slightly falling behind, and then absolutely cannibalize them with a deck like this. So extremely powerful, just not well positioned this particular. Coming in at my number 4 spot is the Lucmetal Zacian deck. Now, this is one of those decks where this is my personal hot take on the deck. The deck is probably better positioned than some of the other above decks, maybe at some times. However, I do feel like this deck just doesn't have a lot of things going for it. So in a way, Zacian V, which I've already talked about, Intrepid Sword and Brave Blade is one of the most broken card combinations I've ever seen. And if it was a stage 2, it'd probably see play. As a basic Pokemon, Zacian V probably deserves a ban. Lucmetal reducing damage for the whole game is very strong, and discarding all your opponent's energies is very strong. Zamazenta V is balanced by stopping your opponent's VMAX from doing damage to it. So I mean, overall, this deck's like a little bit more well balanced than the ADP deck. It seems to do a little bit better because a lot of players do not know how to play against it. But my hot take is that players just don't necessarily know how to play against Lucmetal. They might not necessarily be bad players, but they're probably not good or great players, if that makes sense. And treat that as the nicest way that I could possibly ever say it. I don't ever want to use this channel as a way to talk down on players who might not know a matchup or anything like that. But a lot of players burn their resources against this deck, use research, discard all their energies, discard all their switch, their boss orders, and this deck's like, cool, you can't do a lot of damage, I'm going to set a Lily's Pokédoll in the active and then boss you up and deck you out. Or, oh cool, you don't know how to properly attach your energies to your Pokemon, or come up with a side game plan when you're playing Eternatus. I'm just going to sit here with the Zamazenta, and you're just going to go with your normal Eternatus strategy. For players who don't know how to properly pivot in between games, this deck might be a nightmare to play against. I mean, I just don't see how this deck is successful while there's Crucephalon, Temposard, Baby Blacephalon, and Centiskorch running around. Those are bad matchups. Regardless if anyone's like, oh, I can beat it, or it's a 37, or it's a bad matchup. And if your opponent doesn't set up properly, doesn't have a good list, or doesn't play quite often, or doesn't play well, quite often to me it doesn't really matter what anyone's opinion is. I know what the true matchup is because I have a really good Centiskorch list. I am a really good player. I know how to play this deck very well. I know how to play Centiskorch very well. And this deck loses to Centiskorch a lot more than people think. This deck loses to Blacephalon, Crucephalon more than people think. The games that you sneak out are against players who had offbeat starts, are not the most seasoned players, or they just made a bunch of mistakes. In essence, maybe, I don't know, there's a lot of things. Even as an Eternatus player, I'm not even the most scared of this matchup because I beat it probably 30 to 40% of the time. And that's just through raw skill alone. So the thing that bothers me about this deck is that it gets a really good rep for doing well. I just don't know who it's doing well against because I don't seem to hit those players that it does well against. I mean, if this deck's working for you and you like it, I mean, obviously it's a viable archetype in the game, but the whole goal of just relying on a limited supporter line, no Dedenne, no Crobat, no additional support Pokemon, doing damage reduction with Metal Goggles, Lucario Melmetal, and either attacking with Zacian or going defensive with Zamazenta, to me just doesn't seem to hold. I mean, as a Metal deck, sure, it's probably the best Metal deck, but the same way that Rillaboom is probably the best grass deck is the same kind of argument. So to me, this seems like Metal type Coalossal, where it has some good matchups, has some bad matchups, depends on how well it's placed. Same thing as Rillaboom. Just be careful, because as more players become experienced against this matchup, this deck will probably start winning less and less and less and less. Not to make this a rant about Lucmetal, it's just something that I feel like not enough players talk about. They're always putting this deck so high up. I just don't think it's necessarily as high up as people think, especially looking at it as a pro player in the game. Oh my, how my mighty Pikaram has fallen to number 3. That's fine, it's still one of the best decks that we have in the format, especially after I won the Players' Cup 2 with this deck that my teammates Gabriel Smart, at the time Caleb Rogerson, Daniel Altavilla, and Ahmed Ali really worked on to make this deck work. It's one of those things where this deck, Eternatus kind of popped up, kind of amidst the storm of crushing hammers. It was like, yo, I can beat you. And then other decks like Lucmetal became a little bit better and were able to beat Pikaram. There's been a few things where Pikaram can become poorly positioned very quickly, or it become well positioned very quickly. It now with the double Yell Grunt in the deck, it does boast a strong matchup against a lot of things, where you could just remove their energies with Crushing Hammer, and it's compounding with Team Yell Grunt Crushing Hammer combo. How this deck works is that you could either use Pikaram or Raichu and Alolan Raichu after Bolton sets them up with its Electrify attack. You have ways to attach energies with Lightning, Speed Lightning, Tapu Koko, Electrify, and then you could build up energies with Pikaram's Full Blitz attack. The goal of this deck is to get more energy in play than your opponent, and that's really why Crushing Hammer and Team Yell Grunt are seeing success. Mewtwo Mew allows you to copy Pikaram, Raichu, and Dedenne at once, so quite often it's the better attacker as long as you're not playing against something that plays Mimikyu, something that isn't Psychic type, and something that's just, it's usually better because it has more HP. A lot of the times you can treat this as a disruption based deck with Yell Grunt, Crushing Hammer, Marnie, Reset Stamp, and Raichu Alolan Raichu's Tandem Shock attack to paralyze your opponent over and over again. Now, the one thing that often sells me back on Pikaram, even though it might have done me bad in a few Players' Cup 3 keys and stuff like that, Pikaram feels like it's one of the most consistent decks in format. Quite often, it will set up better than your opponent's deck. It might not have the best matchup against your opponent's deck, and I feel like the deck's slightly outdated. Not that this deck list is outdated, there's just something lingering about this deck that tells me it feels old. It's been around for too long. It came out in Team Up. Team Up came up in like 2019. We're now 2021, and there's still half a year left with this deck in Standard. I mean, it will finally get rotated out around August. So, for me, it just feels like this deck sets up well. This deck feels like it actually has comeback mechanics with a Team Yell Grunt, Crushing Hammer, Marnie, Reset Stamp, Tandem Shock, Tagbolt GX, where you can often creep through plays. And if you've been watching my Players' Cup 2 global recap, and I mean, if you haven't, go check that out. It's a great way for you to understand some of the upper echelon of gameplay, some of my thought process, and kind of enjoy the ride as I'm re-enjoying the ride. But it's one of those things where I think that Pikaram is just, it has game plans where other decks are like, I hit energies, bonk, 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 like Eternatus. Like, it's one of those things where I want to swing 270 every single turn. Do I have boss? No. Okay, I just have to hit 270. Like, I was literally playing in the chill tier last night. At the time of the creation of this video, I was playing Eternatus, and I'm like, cool, I have no way to draw extra cards. I have no way to disrupt my opponent. Let's go, attack with Eternatus VMAX, because there's just not a lot of choices. This deck brings choices, it brings option with quite which quite often translates into better play. So give this deck a whirl if you haven't already. I've talked a lot about it on my channel. There's a lot of Pikaram content, so you're at the right place if you want to learn a little bit about more Pikaram stuff. But this is my current list for the deck. I think it's pretty cool. Double Yell Grunt seems like it's necessary at this time. Here we go, the number 2 deck. The deck that I've been exclusively playing for the past few weeks now is Eternatus VMAX. So I had this deck very low positioned compared to Poison Eternatus last time, and that's because it wasn't well positioned. The deck didn't have enough going for it. But between having Crushing Hammers and Dangerous Drill in the deck gained a lot from the formats, along with a single prize card attacking Pokemon such as Spiritomb, Yveltal, Hoopa that I've added into this deck. So how does Eternatus VMAX work? You basically want to get out a bunch of dark Pokemon and start attacking with Eternatus VMAX to do up to 270 damage per turn. Now, there might be some glaring omissions in this deck. You might be like, yo, Zach, why are there only 2 copies of Zigzagoon? My question to you is, what do you use Zigzagoon against? I feel like you're never getting enough damage. I mean, it's with the 4 Zigzagoon and no Scoop Up Net, you can never get enough damage on an Eternatus VMAX to make it count. You can't really get enough to make it count on a Centiskorch or anything else like that. It's really only in like niche situations where it's good, or you want to hit ADP for a single damage counter. Here, I think the single damage counter works out really well. You could take off their big charm if they play it with Dangerous Drill, and that kind of screams to me that 4 Zigzagoon is just an unnecessary staple in the deck. I've seen no issues with the 2 copies. Spiritomb, very good against single prize card attacking decks. Against Pikaram, you could always build up one with 5 damage counters. They have no way to really snipe it beyond Tag Bolt GX, and I don't think they're going to Tag Bolt GX a single prize card Pokemon. Against Mad Party and even Oricorio GX decks that have that in the deck, Anguish Cry is a very powerful attack. Yveltal is a great free retreat start, and it's a good pivot in between. You can always send up something to decide what you're doing for your turn. Clutch is an amazing attack against Mad Party and against Decigoons. Derail is good against any deck that plays special energies. If you're playing against it, watch out if you play special energies. Hoopa is great against decks that play Jirachi or decks that just have low HP Pokemon, because you could just switch into an Assault Gate and win the game on the first turn, or come up with 90 damage quicker than a Spiritomb can use Anguish Cry. I am probably 1 boss's orders light in this deck. You could probably cut a Dark Energy and that's fine. However, some games you might want to play all 10 Dark Energies, so tough to say. Dangerous Drill has come in and out of my lists as of late. It's one of those things where are Big Charms popular or no? Are Metal Goggles popular or no? And it's really one of those like metagame calls. Crushing Hammer is a really good staple with Eternatus and other decks being just so popular in our current format. And I really think the 4 Quick Ball, 4 Great Ball, 2 copies of Pokemon Communication is the correct count. I have tried with Rotom Phone in this deck. I haven't tried the Big Charm version yet, but it's one of those things where you can always have a couple wiggle room spots here and there. And see exactly how it goes. This is probably the correct amount of Pokemon. I played the deck the other day with 1 less Pokemon, and I really felt like it. So, I mean, you could change the Pokemon line around depending on the metagame, but I wouldn't really mess around with the counts, if that makes any sense. So, if you're looking to do a bunch of damage, pretty brainless fun, Eternatus VMAX is a super powerful deck, and it can quite often take you to those top cuts in Pokemon events. The deck's not super hard to acquire online once you stomach your Crobat Vs. In Eternatus VMAX, most of the cards are pretty cheap, and they are going to be good in standard for the next year or 2, so keep up with it. I mean, I think Eternatus VMAX is super good, although with Battle Styles coming out, it might struggle against Urshifu, but we'll tackle that bridge once we get there. Hallelujah! I know somewhere that Thomas, Cash, Alex, Josh, Frink, all those peeps, all the Centiskorch homies are like, yo, someone finally got it right. It's not tone deaf like some other bigger YouTube channels, no names to be mentioned, that quite often don't include this deck. This deck is clearly the best deck in format, and I'll tell you what, like, it's just the best deck in format. It has too many accomplishments, it has too many things going for it that would not make it the best deck in format. You have an attack that is semi-infinite, which means that it goes based off the fire energies that you have, with Centiskorch VMAX just being able to keep on self-accelerating energies, keep on reaching higher and higher damage limits until you get a knockout against something that you really want to hit. Jirachi makes this deck consistent, Crobat makes this deck consistent, Dedenne, Eldegoss, same thing. The only issue is the deck is based around Welder, which is a card that allows you to attach 2 fire energies, which is a necessary evil, but it's only drawing 3 cards. So sometimes you're going to get a rough hand. But as I played this deck, for the North America qualifiers in the Players' Cup 2. I went 7-0 with this deck, and then I ultimately dropped it for Pikaram when I made the Global Finals, which turned out to be the correct choice there. No surprise, I won it, whatever. Moving on, Centiskorch VMAX is really one of those things where if you're in a best of 3 format, this is clearly hands down the best deck. Until people start countering this deck out, and I mean, I don't feel like with the amount of Pikaram that we have, that these water type decks can really keep up to it. If you hit a few, you got unlucky, it sucks to suck, it happens. Like, you're gonna get hit with some variance. But just being able to have a wide variety of attackers, like the Blacephalon, Crescephalon, Tempozard, Volcanion to power up more energies, just like the natural strength, even including a Reshiram, so you just go 200 on your opponent very quickly. I mean, I think all of those are very good things going on for this deck. This deck is close to being number 2, and that's just because I feel like it's slightly more, it's more inconsistent than Eternatus. So Eternatus is the best deck for best of 1. If you're a little bit lucky, you can overcome some of that. But sometimes you're going to play Centiskorch and just do very bad, just because you get some poor draws. So this is why a lot of the top players for the Players' Cup 3 are playing Centiskorch. It's doing very well for them. Sometimes they're just going to lose in the top 8, and that's fine, bounce back. But Volcanion's a good out against Decigoons. Like, there's a lot of cool things with Scoop of Net and the Zigzagoons and the Phiones and the Giratinas. I just really like all these concepts in the deck. I know Cash and Thomas have largely contributed to this list. So it's one of those things where their list is just very fine-tuned. There's really not a better list to be playing at this current time. You could swap in things like Eternatus-GX. There's a few cards you can try here and there. Maybe if you're missing a Reshiram, you could try out the Eternatus-GX. Things like that. That wouldn't be too bad. But this is ultimately the top of our list. Just the kind of untamed powerhouse in our format, to be kind of clear with it. So hopefully it can serve you well if you do get a chance to try it. If you haven't picked up Centiskorch already, it is really worthwhile. And again, there is plenty of Centiskorch content on my channel, so be sure to check that out. Alright, we made it through here. Thank you so much for watching this video up until this point. Hopefully you like to see the decks that were on this list. Maybe you got some cool new tech ideas, something like that. I mean, if there's a deck that you think I'm missing, let me know in the comments below. I try to stay pretty active on that. If you're enjoying what's going on, hit that subscribe button right there. I mean, there's a lot of great stuff coming up on the channel, so hopefully you enjoy what's to come. But I mean, I really appreciate all y'all watching everything so far. I'm gonna go create some more content, so I'll let y'all go. But again, thank you so much for watching. Have yourself a wonderful day. Peace out. Thank you so much for watching and supporting the channel. If you haven't already, it'd mean the world to me if you could subscribe to help support me as a content creator. Thanks again, and have yourself a great one.